Hi everybody, Steve Farmer once again bringing you another feature game from the fourth round of the 2012 U.S. Amateur West Regional Championship. This was held on May 27th. It's taken some time to get all the games put into the computer to bring them to you because I work 6 days a week, so it's not so easy to just pop these in every single day and then make videos. So I hope you bear with me, but we do have some interesting games to look at. Alright, here's another feature game. This is between Cervantes, who's rated 1398, against Medina, who's rated 1342. So it should be a pretty level match here. Now, Marcos starts out with b3, knight f6, e3, g6, bishop to b2. We have a Queen's Indian with colors reversed for some reason. Bishop g7, d3, d6. Bishop e2, castles, knight d2, e5, e4, knight c6, knight gf3, bishop to d7, knight to c4, queen to c8, h3, knight h5, and now g3. Very interesting position here. Okay, white has just made a mistake, and he's giving up his h-pawn. But I wanted to bring this game to you for this exact position, for a reason. I got a question for you. How many of you would take the pawn on h3 right away? Is there a better move? Okay, let's look at the pawn structure. And if we look at the pawn structure, black has his pawns on c7, d6, and e5 kind of pointing toward the king side, which is pretty standard in the King's Indian defense. White has his pawns on c2, d3, and e4, also aiming at the king's side. Not a real standard setup for white, other than the King's Indian attack, but his bishop's on e2, not g2. So, everything that we've learned from chess is going to tell us that black should attack on the king's side, which is true, but there's also exceptions to every rule, and that's what we need to look for in chess. Now, Sam did take on h3. Let's pop back for a second. Is there a better move? Well, yes, there is. You can gain some space on the queen side with b5. Okay, now, what is white going to do? Well, knight to e3 looks like the natural choice. And now a5. You could take on h3 here, but that would be very similar to the game continuation. But let's carry on with a5. And why are we looking at this? Well, what's white going to do? He's going to play queen to d2 and castle long now that we're throwing the pawns up the board on that side? No, I don't think so. He may, but if he does, it'd be a whole lot of fun because we throw the pawns up the queen side, start weakening his pawns over there, then we look for an f5 push, then we look for weakening the center, and then we look for the bishops to come in on these long diagonals and just pulverize white. So, yeah, that looks very risky. So I think white has to do something right away to counteract that. And so probably a4 is the best move here. And if pawn takes, rook takes. And now you could play bishop takes h3 still here. And after knight h4, I think white has a slight edge. So instead of that, we play queen to b7. And all we're doing here with black is we're just sitting back and waiting for white to do something. If he castles, well, then we take the pawn on h3 for sure. We're threatening things like, maybe knight to d4, knight to b4, and the bishop on d7 is hitting that rook. So bishop c3, and now f5. The precepts of the pawn structure are still there. We're set up to play for an attack on the king side. So after e takes f5, and instead of capturing right away, we go knight to d4. We're hitting the rook on a4, and we're threatening to trade off for the bishop on e2. So if he tries bishop takes here, we take, the knight has to move, and now we take the rook. And now we got queen to b4 with check, queen d2, and we pick up the pawn as well. Now going back, castling is probably the best move here, but let's take a look at f takes g6. Now we got tons of pressure on the knight on f3, so we go ahead and take, And now we got pawn takes check. And the best move here is king to h8, the old dead body defense. You throw your king behind the shield of the opponent's pawn. And that's a good thing. Why is that good? Well, white can never take that pawn. It's his own color. It's his own pawn. He can't take it. So that pawn is there for shelter forever. So if the pawn on h3 is left hanging here, black can just grab it and have no fear of an attack down the h file. So if he castles, we just play bishop takes rook. Okay, so let's go back in this variation a bit where knight to d4 was played, and now castling should probably be the move. Bishop takes a4, b takes a4, knight takes f5, knight takes f5, gf5, and now white should play g4 here. If he plays knight takes e5, trying to get to this knight, well, we can throw in between move, knight takes g3, hitting the rook. So that's not good. So d4, and now e4. And I like black's position. Black has won the exchange, but white's got some play here too. It's not a clear advantage for black, though I think I'd prefer to have the black pieces, to be honest with you. But actually that was the best defense that I could find against b5 here. Instead, Sam took on h3, and this is dangerous because it opens up the h file, and now queen to d2 was played. And this is not the best move. He's getting ready to castle, so it makes sense. It was better to play knight to g1, kick that bishop out of there, and now bishop takes h5, and gh5, queen takes h5, and look, we got pressure on h7 built in here. So h6, and now bishop to c1, and I think white has a good advantage here. He's not winning yet, but I think he's got a good initiative. He's going to be able to move the bishop out of the way, castle queenside, get the knight into the game, and maybe even double on the h file. A lot of things white can do to hurt you from this position. So back in our game, queen to d2 is played, and now technically the best move is just drop the knight back, but I like the practical choice that Sam came up with, which was bishop to g2. And he's rewarded immediately for this. His opponent plays rook takes h5, which is not the best. White should here play rook to h4 instead. And after the trade here, white can castle, but black can now play h5 and is relatively safe. I'd say the game's pretty equal here. But back in our game, rook takes h5 was played. Not very well calculated. Pawn takes, and now he castles. Probably best to play knight h4 with giving black a slight edge. Now bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3. Now queen to e6 was played. I was not real happy with this move. I thought that knight to d4 was a better idea. Let's take a look at that. And now if bishop to g2, we can play h4. And if pawn takes, then the queen starts to infiltrate like this. Going back after knight to d4, we should probably take. And then we take rook h1, and now a5. And black is going to start whipping up some counterplay. For example, if a4, we play b5. Should be an exciting game. I would prefer to have the black pieces here again, though it's probably realistically pretty level. Back in our game, instead of knight to d4, he played queen to e6. And now queen to g5 was played. And I think white actually, instead of queen to g5, should have played knight to e3. We'll come back to that in a moment. But knight to e3 serves a purpose to restrict the move f5. And after queen to g5, black could now play f5. He did not. He played queen to h6. It's the right idea, but the wrong timing. So let's step back. f5 was the move. And now, if pawn takes pawn, then queen takes. If queen takes, we're hitting the queen and the bishop, so he's got to take. Rook takes, and now bishop checks to get out of the way. King to h8, now f3. Rook to g5. Rook to h1. Now knight to b4. And I think black has a very pleasant game here. He's up the exchange and a pawn, and I think black should be able to win fairly easily. So that was after f5, and white taking on f5. So instead, queen h5. Now we can check with the queen. And if queen takes, bishop takes with check, king to b1, f takes e4, we're hitting the bishop. So it's got to take with the bishop. Now rook takes f2. I think black is winning in this position. Definitely has a solid advantage. And if instead of queen takes on h6, if he moves the king, then we have f takes e4, hitting the bishop again. And we still pick up the pawn. I think black is even better in this line than in the other one. Going back to our game, none of that was played. Sam played queen to h6, and Marcos traded, and bishop takes with check, king to b1. And now I think f5 is a bit sharper than what was played here, but Sam did play the move I mentioned earlier on in the game. He played b5. Like I said, f5 was probably more to the point. Knight to e3. And now he plays knight to d4, which is not the strongest. Let's step back and take a look at what he should have played. I think bishop takes e3 here is the move. He has to take with the pawn. Now a5, looking to whip up counterplay on the queen side. Bishop takes h5, a4, d4, f6, bishop to g4, rook f to b8, d5, and knight to d8. I think black has a good position here. We'll just go through a few more moves of this to give you a feeling for what could happen here. b4, a3, bishop c1, king to g7, bishop f5. That's a nice bishop. Knight f7, rook h1, h6, g4, knight to g5. That's a nice knight. So both sides got a good minor piece. And black's got to find a way to open up the pawn position a bit for his rooks to have any effectiveness. But that bishop on c1 looks really sickly. I mean, it's blocked in by b4 and e3. He could perhaps bring it around to h4 via d2, e1 to h4. But is he really going to want to trade off for that knight? Because I'm sure that would bring a rook over to the h-file in that case. Yeah, so let's just play on a few more moves. Because these are tough things to look at when you're playing a very close position where you have the exchange. So king c2, c5, got to bust open the position somehow. dc6, rook takes c6. Rook to d1. Well, if he tries bishop takes a3, black can play this, and we're going to pick up the e-pawn and start to open up things even further. So rook to d1, rook to a8, king to b3. Now we can play rook a to c8. And the point here is if he takes the rook, then we can play knight takes on e4. We're threatening mate. Rook takes c3 would be mate. So he has to deal with that. Now we can take the bishop. And in this position, black is just up a pawn. Now, sure, he can take on a3, but his pawns are very, very, very weak. And that pawn on g4 is sooner or later going to be a goner. I mean, one of the threats right now is knight to f2, picking up the g-pawn. Yeah, so black is definitely winning in there. So going back after rook a c8, willing to give up his life for the position, it's best not to take rook to d3, rook 8 c7. Now that the c3 pawn was protected, that threat didn't work anymore. Now you grab the pawn. Now rook to c4. Bishop b2 and knight takes e4. And I still like black here. I think that black can probably win this with persistent, accurate play. Alright, that was a long-winded variation, and I apologize, but I just want to give some kind of ideas where you can head to from a position like this. Going back to our game, though, knight to d4 was played. And after the bishop takes and pawn takes, we have a dead level position. Okay, white plays knight f5. Now he is down the exchange and a pawn, but the position is pretty level because he has some really good minor pieces. Bishop to g7, and now bishop takes a pawn on h5. So he's just down the pure exchange. In the long run, that may be enough to win, but that's a long way from here. a5, rook to h1, rook fe8, rook h4. Nice way to bring the rook into the game, king f8. And now bishop to g4. It was worth trying rook to g4, bishop h8, knight to h6. But black can probably hold a draw here with bishop to g7, knight f5, bishop h8. Realistically, I think that this is what white should have gone after to try and get the draw. Back in our game, though, he played bishop to g4 instead. Now h6. And, you know, maybe black's a bit better here. Bishop h5, rook to e5, f4. And now Sam must have given this some serious thought. And he plays rook takes f5. But it's not the best move. I can understand his idea. I'll give back the material, I'll just dig in like an Alabama tick, and we have a drawn position. But better was to play rook to c5. This maintains lateral defense, and it also threatens some offense on the queen side. Black is only ever so slightly better here. And I don't think that in the long run white will maintain enough compensation for the material. Instead, Sam decided to try and simplify. But let's look at just a couple moves deeper here. Rook e8, rook h2, and rook c3. I think that white is pretty much bobbled up. He doesn't want to trade any minors because those are the only active pieces he's got. I think that black can sit on this position for a long time and wait for white to get impatient. And once white gets impatient, he's liable to make a bad move. But in our game, as I mentioned, Sam played rook takes f5, ef5, and now a4. Rook to e8 was simple equality. a4 was played, bishop to f3, rook to a6. This is okay, but I still would prefer rook to e8. And now f6 was played, and this is a bit of an error here. If we go back, I think that white should have played g4, king g8, g5, ab3, ab3, c6, f6, bishop f8, bishop h5, d5, rook to g4, c5, f5. Taking on h6 really doesn't accomplish a whole lot. So f5, hg5, rook takes, king h7, bishop takes on f7, rook takes on f6. And now if bishop takes d5, king to h6, rook to g2, and rook takes f5, this is a level game. Or he could play bishop to e6 here, and then b4, and again, I think this is a level game. Maybe white's a tiny bit better. But in our game, he played f6. Bishop takes f6, rook takes h6, and now I thought that Sam should have played king to g7. He did not. But if king to g7, and rook to h1, c6, got to fight for these light squares. Rook comes over to e1, king to f8, preventing any penetration. Bishop to g4, rook to a7, rook to h1, now just simply d5, and I think the position's dead level. Instead of bringing the king to g7, he played bishop to g7, rook to h5, and c6 needed to be played here. Black really needs to fight for those light squares, but he played c5, which is a mistake. But fortunately, his opponent didn't notice this. Now, if you were playing white, what would you play here? I think that white has a good way to get at least a clearly better position, if not a winning position. If you'd like to pause the video and see if you can find what white should play here, go ahead and do so. Okay, what he played in the game was g4, and that's not the strongest move. He should play b4. Did you guess that move? If you did, good job. And the reason is if he takes, then when you take here, now that pawn on b5 is lost, and we just gained a pawn. I think this is a winning advantage for white. Or if he plays rook to b6, which is probably the best shot, then pawn takes, rook takes. Got a pawn, but this is a little more difficult for white to prove as being a winning amount. But white is clearly better here, no doubt. Instead, he played g4, and now a3. Rook a7 is probably better, but a3. Now he plays rook to f5. He misses the b4 idea again. Let's take a step back. It holds the same weight. If king over, then we can play rook to g5 and rook to b6. White's slightly better here. Or if b takes, pawn takes, rook to h6 threatens to come in on that bishop there. So king c1, rook to h2, rook takes b5, rook f2, bishop d5, and rook takes f4. Very unclear position here. I think with the bishop's opposite color, we're looking at a draw in a lot of these lines. In our game, rook f5 was played, rook a7, bishop to e4. Now I think Sam should have played rook to c7. He played rook to e7. King c1. Let's step back. Rook to d5 was a good winning try because if rook to here, now we can play b4. Remember this move? You got to time it right. Pawn takes, rook takes d5, bishop takes d5, bishop f6, and king to c1. Huge advantage for white? No, not really. Remember, those bishops of opposite color help hold a lot of these positions, but it was definitely a try for a win. Instead, he played king to c1, king to g8, king to d2. Now here, black should play b4. It stops white from playing b4 once and for all. Instead, he plays rook to e6, now g5, and now rook to g6. I think this is a mistake. Yeah, Sam's endgame technique was not with him in this game. Rook to e7 makes more sense. Now if he tries b4 here, we can go bishop to f8, so that after bishop c6, well, first of all, he plays b takes c5, we go d takes c5, and he really can't take with the rook because of rook takes on e4. So, bishop c6, king to g7, bishop takes b5, cb4, bishop c4, king g6, rook checks, king g7. White holds a tiny edge here. He has no material advantage. We still have rooks on the board, and we have bishops opposite color. Very difficult to win this. Rook to g6, though, was a mistake. And now here, b4 was definitely the strongest move in the position, and it gave white a winning position in this line. But he missed it. He played rook to d5. Now Sam realizes that rook was not well placed there and moves rook to e6. And now white makes a bad move, or a questionable move. I think b4 was not as good as it was on the move before, but it's still a good shot at winning. Instead he plays f5. And now Sam goes full tilt. He plays rook to e5. Let's step back. He had a different move here. Take a look at this. Let me flip the board for you. Okay, now you have control of black. What would you play if you were playing the black pieces here? Go ahead and pause the video and see what you can come up with. Okay, hopefully you paused the video and you found the move bishop to e5. I really like this move. And I remember walking by somewhere around this position thinking, you know, he could have done that, huh? And sure enough. Now, if white tries f takes e6, well, then we got bishop to f4 check, so that he cannot grab the bishop. King to e2, and now f takes e6. King to f3, hitting the bishop. Now bishop to h2, and that rook still has no escape square. So if he tries rook f5, we can take, bishop takes, and now b4. We're locked up like a snare drum. White is not going to win this, no matter what he tries. And instead of rook to f5, if he tries b4, remember we looked at all that before, now we can play pawn takes rook, bishop takes check, king g7, and now bishop c6. If he takes on c5, Then we recapture and he plays bishop c6, then we just simply play b4 and we locked up again. So this is the only way to try and get some dynamic play going is with this. And pawn takes, king to g4, bishop to e5, and now bishop takes b5. But again, with bishops opposite color, this looks like a dead draw. So here, after bishop e5, instead of f takes e6, he should try b4 right away. But after bishop f4 check, king e2, rook to e5 now. If he plays rook takes d6, we have rook takes e4, and then bishop takes d6. So b takes c5, rook takes d5, bishop takes d takes c5, and this is going to be a draw. In the game, though, he played rook to e5, and now rook takes d6, and white is winning. Now b4 was tried, but it's already getting too late. Rook to d8. Now Sam makes a blunder here, but just to point out, if he had played the best move, which is bishop to f8, it still doesn't help him because king e2, f6, gf6, king f7. King comes up, bishop h6, rook checks, king takes, and now we check here, and then king moves back, king to here, f6, threatens a nasty discovered check, rook takes e4, rook takes h6, king takes, king g6, and then easy win for white. Just flip the board back around. Played king to h7. Now, you have 2 seconds. What will you play as white? 1001, 1002. f6. Sam took, and he resigned after d takes e4. Yeah, after f6, he's just losing the bishop for nothing. So, yeah. Tough ending for Sam. I don't know what happened there. He made a few second-best moves, but getting toward the end there, he just did not try and find any way to fight white's plans. And I think that move of bishop to e5 here was a nice way to totally level out the game. No question about it. But this is right around move 40, and I'm sure that the players are both fatigued. Very easy to miss these things. All right, Sam, you had some chances to really mix this one up. Nice job by Marcos to pull off the victory here. Very interesting game from people around the 1400 level. So I hope you guys found this entertaining, and I hope you'll stay tuned for the rest of the series. I should be bringing you another game fairly soon. Until next time, good luck.